Hi guys, welcome to a video. In this video, I will be looking at the history of and the connection between women and witchcraft. When we think of witchcraft today, I should imagine images from popular culture are conjured in our minds. Black cats, broomsticks, Halloween, books, TV shows, and the movies. But the real-life history behind the now seemingly novel, empowering, and mysterious figure of the witch tells quite a different story. Of course, most of us are aware of the historical witch trials and hunts which took place in the 17th century, the Pendle and Salem witch trials being two of the most famous examples. But the reason why women became synonymous with witchcraft is not as widely exposed. Women's history is a subject which often remains in the dark, so allow me to shed some light on women and witchcraft, a history. It is believed that the concept of the witch first came to be thousands of years ago and singularly arose in several different cultures across centuries. In Greek mythology, the first witch was known as Hecate, the goddess of magic and astrology. She would bestow wealth and all the blessings of daily life. In fact, there were pillars constructed called Hecatea, which stood at crossroads and doorways to keep away evil spirits. However, in the Western world, the predominant concept of the witch derives from Old Testament laws against witchcraft and was adopted by society when belief in witchcraft gained church approval in the early modern period. In the Middle Ages, belief in magic was categorized into good and bad, and both women and men could practice it. Women and men could also both be accused of using magic for malevolent purposes. In the 15th century, however, witchcraft underwent feminization and became largely synonymous with women. Those accused of using magic for malevolent purposes from this period were overwhelmingly women, and this would continue until the law against witchcraft was repealed in the 18th century. It is common knowledge that the majority of accused witches during the witch craze of the late 16th and 17th centuries were female. There is less unanimity, however, about the reasons for the gender imbalance. The whole phenomenon of the witch hunt has been attributed variously to the religious, economic, demographic, social and political changes of the late 16th century. Moreover, it is often assumed that these changes must somehow account for the femininity of most of the witch hunt's victims. But although later 16th century developments may explain the increased concern with witchcraft, which characterizes that period, the fact that witches were generally expected to be female can be more satisfactorily explained by reference to an earlier time. This article, drawing upon the records of the church courts of the Diocese of Canterbury between the earliest extant prosecution for sorcery in 1396 and the passage of the Elizabethan Witchcraft Statute in 1563, explores that intriguing question. It will argue that, while in the later Middle Ages, witchcraft employed for beneficent purposes might be attributed to men or women, black magic was already considered a largely female preserve, well before the early modern witch craze began. In fact, the church courts from the late 14th century onwards prosecuted people accused of using witchcraft for both malevolent and benevolent purposes. But benevolent witches, at least in the late medieval Canterbury church courts, were about equally likely to be men or women, while bad witches were almost exclusively female. The notion of benevolence being attributed to women was further fueled by the notoriously misogynistic Malleus Maleficarum, which first appeared in 1487. And was the first widely read European text to identify witches specifically as female. So whilst historical records show that both women and men were documented to have been tried for witchcraft, records show that women were much more commonly accused of using magic for ill intent. It is suggested that this is connected to the belief in women's moral weakness, which was believed to make them much more susceptible to demonic temptation. There are really several factors for the feminization of witchcraft, such as religious tensions, economic anxiety and misogyny, which leads me to our next section. One of the reasons a woman may be accused of witchcraft was cursing or losing her temper with someone in public, particularly if something bad happened to the person who was cursed at or quarrelled with. It has been suggested that this accusation against women was due to male fear of possible disorder among women, which included socially inappropriate behaviour, particularly in places undergoing rapid economic restructuring. If women enjoyed improved employment opportunities in the aftermath of the Black Death, an economic recession in the late 15th century produced male resentment of this, it could be that men became more disposed to believe women guilty of malevolent witchcraft, as well as increasingly anxious to control more mundane forms of female misbehaviour. Sigrid Bronner suggested that women, becoming more economically disadvantaged in the later 16th century, reacted with socially inappropriate behaviour, which made them susceptible to charges of witchcraft. The use of strong language by women, Bronner claimed, had formerly been grudgingly accepted, but changing elite views about appropriate behaviour for women in the 16th century caused sharp-tongued females to be considered potential witches. Records show that women were often accused of witchcraft by both men and other women. The accusations by women of women have been interpreted as a struggle between women for control of female social space, or ascribed to women's own anxiety about their role as mothers. Prosecutions by men of women have been ascribed to men's fear of impotence, to male reactions to women's real or imagined power as mothers and nurturers, or as attempts to suppress the independence of women perceived to be outside patriarchal control, as widows, healers, or midwives. Witchcraft became feminized and heavily associated with demonic temptation in the 15th century, both of these encouraged by the predated and outlasting belief in women's moral and intellectual weakness. It is also within this period that the concept of witchcraft came to be associated with night flight, using magic to harm others, attending a witch's sabbat, and sealing a pact with the devil. According to historical research, the 15th century is where the feminization of witchcraft and greater female predominance in witch trials really starts. In Europe generally, in the 14th and 15th centuries, women outnumbered men by about 2 to 1 as defendants in witch trials, with female predominance becoming greater in the late 15th century. These figures, drawn mainly from printed sources, probably overrepresent high-profile, often political cases in which men were more likely to be prominent. However, there is little doubt that the 15th century was a crucial period in the feminization of witchcraft. The feminization of witchcraft in the 15th century no doubt contributed to the witch craze of the late 16th and 17th centuries, which saw the execution of hundreds of women in Britain and America. This period also produced the Pendle and Salem witch trials, two of the most famous witch trials in history. The trials of the Pendle witches in 1612 are among the most famous witch trials in English history. It is also one of the best recorded of the 17th century because it was documented in an official publication, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster, by the Clerk of the Court, Thomas Potts. In the Pendle witch trials, 12 people were accused of witchcraft. 1 died while held in custody. 11 went to trial. Of the 11 who went to trial, 9 women and 2 men, 10 were found guilty and executed by hanging. Only 1 was found not guilty. The Salem witch trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused. 30 were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging, 14 women and 5 men. 1 other man was pressed to death for refusing to plead, and at least 5 people died in jail. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, continental Europeans executed between 200,000 and 500,000 witches, 85% or more of whom were women. From an intellectual understanding, the witch craze answered the need for a redefinition of moral boundaries as a result of the profound changes in the medieval social order. However, economic and demographic changes, together with deeply rooted misogynistic projections, explain why the witch hunts were directed at women. Witchcraft trials and executions lasted until the 18th century, with the last known execution for witchcraft taking place in Switzerland in 1782. In 1736, the UK Parliament passed an act repealing the laws against witchcraft. The decline of witchcraft was marked by an increasing reluctance to prosecute witches, the acquittal of many who were tried, the reversal of convictions on appeal, and eventually the repeal of the laws that had authorised the prosecutions. Both the 18th and 19th centuries were a time of great political upheaval and social enlightenment, with new ideas being exchanged, and in particular, about the church and its influence on society. The decline and end of witch hunts in modern Europe was a gradual and multifaceted process, with varying political, social, intellectual, and institutional factors. The 20th century marked both the start of huge socio-political changes for women and the start of witches arriving in popular culture. There was a particular boom of witches in popular culture in both the mid and late 20th century, and it's no coincidence the boom happened around these time frames. For where huge socio-cultural shifts were taking place around women, witches would inevitably follow. Witches first began to appear on screen in the late 1930s, and two particular examples from this period are Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and The Wizard of Oz. Both of these films adopt the concept of the witch as an old hag, a notion often traced back to the Elizabethan skeptic Reginald Scott, who described the typical witch as an ugly old hag, but Scott's description has often been quoted out of context. He was emphasizing pathetic old women in order to demonstrate the folly of believing such people had supernatural powers. Out of 13 alleged witches Scott described from his own experience, only 3 could have been widows, yet when generalizing, he always referred to witches as old women. In the late 1950s and early 60s, titles such as Bell, Book and Candle and Bewitched appeared. These titles applied a more youthful and comedic approach to the figure of the witch, presenting her in a rather more fun and alluring light, a far cry from the elderly hags causing chaos in the 1930s. Moving along to the 1990s, a second wave of witchcraft appeared on screen, with titles such as Practical Magic, Charmed, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. These productions were a mix of comedy and drama, more focused on the relationships between women as opposed to solely heteronormative romantic ones. Witches also appeared in popular culture on page as well as on screen in the late 20th century, with literary productions such as Harry Potter, Practical Magic, and The Worst Witch beginning to emerge. Notably, all of these works were created by women. A figure like Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter series is an antithesis to the notion that women, and in particular witches, were intellectually inferior, and instead depicts a bright young witch who is often more intelligent than her peers. And The Worst Witch is a female-centric piece of literature about a young girl who attends a girls-only boarding magic school. As a fun fact, The Worst Witch was initially rejected from publishers on the grounds that children would find a book about a school for witches too scary. Oh, if only they knew. Contrastingly to literature, films about witchcraft such as Hocus Pocus, The Craft, The Witches, and The Witches of Eastwick all had majority male writers and directors, reflecting the male predominance and lens of the film industry. Whether on page or on screen, witchcraft has proved to be a lucrative concept which has stayed relevant through the years, likely due to what the witch represents: a woman with power. Historically, controlling the figure of the witch was a means of controlling the potential of women. Women with power represent a challenge to patriarchal narratives, and like the witch, women with power were once feared. In a lot of ways, it can be said that over the years, our embrace of the witch is our embrace of women. Overall, we see that the figure of the witch, once persecuted and victim to misogyny and political upheaval, has become a symbol of endurance and a representation of female empowerment. The modern-day concept of the witch can be invoked as a statement of strength and stamina, both things which have kept women alive throughout the ages, despite existing in a society which seeks to break them down. Okay guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to add one frog to my cauldron. I'm brewing a potion so I can hold on to my wilting youth.
I'm just kidding. I can't wait to become an old hag, you know? The outside will finally match the inside of me, which is just basically a bitter old hag. I think we need more bitter old hag positivity in the world, you know? Bye.